Rabbi Sai Azoi. In his plan to escape Hashem's instruction to go to Nineveh, Yonah boards a ship bound for Tarshish. But a great storm starts up, and the sailors, fearing that the ship is going to break and sink, cast lots, wanting to know who is responsible for the storm. And after the lot falls on Yonah, they ask him, "Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do?" But he answers them in a very interesting way. He says to them, "Ivri anoichi v'ez Hashem elokei hashamayim ani yareh." I'm a Jew, I'm an Ivri, and I fear God. That's what Yonah responded, but that's not what they asked him. They asked him what his occupation was, what he does. Why didn't he answer their questions? My hi. Rav Yosef Yozel Horovitz, known as the Alter Novardok, was born in 1848. From a young age, he was a brilliant learner. 18 years old, he got engaged, but tragedy struck before the wedding. His future father-in-law died, leaving him, instead of embarking on a life of learning, to take over his father-in-law's business, support his mother-in-law, his wife, and her 7 siblings. He was very successful in his business. Age 27, his work took him to the town of Memel, where Rabbi Yisrael Salanta lived. And Rav Yosef Yozel heard 13 Musa Shmuzim from Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. Extremely moved by the teachings of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, he decided to totally change his life. He left business and enrolled in the famous Kollel in Kovna. Eventually, his wife and children joined him there, but tragedy struck. When his wife was giving birth to their 3rd child, she died. Once again, he changed his derech and became a total parush, meaning he lived in complete isolation in a room rented for the local tinsmith in Kovna. And that was very controversial. Rabbi Yitzchak Achon Inspector, who was the Rav of Kovna and the Gadlus in his own right, held that what Rav Yosef Yozel was doing was not correct, to be that isolated, to be that removed from the world. And the Maskilim also made fun of his ways. Until one day, in a meeting with the Alter of Kelm, the Alter of Kelm convinced Rav Yosef Yozel that in fact the right way for great Torah leaders of the time was not to be inside, isolated, was to go out and touch the lives of other Yidden and help them with the challenges of the time. Once again, he made an enormous change in his life, turned 180 degrees, and a new revolution had begun. The Novardok Bochrim would literally take a map of Russia and Lithuania, take a pin, and put it down. And whatever town the pin fell on, if there were Jews in that town, they would decide, okay, we're setting up a yeshiva there. One bocher would act as the mashkiach, the other bocher would act as the rosh yeshiva, and off they would go to the town with no resources other than their passion to save Jews from the Enlightenment, from communism, from socialism. Eventually, the Novardok network, under the Alter's guiding hand, grew to over 100 yeshivas. The Alter's Talmidim would turn up and announce they were starting yeshiva, often before they even had premises. And they would just bring in boys from all different backgrounds and all different ages. In those yeshivas, the Alter's vision was realized. Musa was learned with fire and passion. The tefillahs were loud and energetic. There was an unyielding strive for emes. Many, countless young men literally owed their Yiddishkeit to the Novardok yeshivas. And great men were built there. The Stipler, Rav Yechazkel Abramsky, Rav Yankele Galinsky, the Ponevezherov. All of these great names and many more were Talmidim of the Novardok yeshivas. Some of the stories have become famous. Novardok Bochrim would go into a pharmacy and ask for nails, or 10 of them would turn up at the house of a random wealthy man and ask if it was okay if they could come in and daven mincha. And when asked by hostile border police for passports, they would instead put out their pockets and Mercedes Yesharim. But this wasn't some type of derech of getting kapara through bizyonis. On the contrary, the Alter held that the only way to become great through a real mitzvah, lishma, was to make sure that you don't care less about what anyone else thinks about you. And this was a training. And when Novardok Bochrim would turn up in a town with no resources, no money whatsoever, that was a training in bitachon, which for the Alter was a prized midah. In fact, he would sign off his name at the bottom of letters, simply base, Bal Bitachon. The Alter himself was nifta in 1919, tending to his bochrim when the typhoid epidemic broke out. He himself contracted typhoid and that's how he died. That was part of the bitachon. He understood Hashem wanted him to look after his talmidim. Everything else which would happen, that was already in his hands. Back to our kasha about Yonah. Why didn't he answer the questions which they asked him? So I heard an explanation as follows. They were asking him, Yonah, define yourself. It's just in their worldview, a person is defined by where they come from and what their actions and activities are on a day-to-day basis. Yonah responded by defining himself. He just did so using his own parameters. He was telling them, I'm much more than just my actions on a day-to-day basis. I'm higher than that. I've got a deeper direction. My personality is taking me somewhere further than just what I do day to day. Ivri anoichi, ves Hashem elokei hashamayim ani yoreh. As Yom Kippur approaches, perhaps there's a danger of focusing too much on the minutiae of our lives. I did this wrong, I did that specific Aveira. Of course that's important, but maybe the message from Yonah is that there's a higher calculation too. Who am I? Where am I heading? What direction am I going in? This idea is elucidated beautifully by the Alter himself with a mashal. A man's gone on a train, and the train's heading in the wrong direction. He doesn't realize that when he first goes on the train. Eventually, someone tells him that you're going in the wrong direction. So, what he does, he gets up and moves to the other side of the table, so he's facing the direction that he wants to go to. That doesn't help, because this train's actually getting further and further away from the place he wants to go. His small action was helpless. What he actually needs to do is get off the train, change the platform, and take the train in the right direction. And this is a lesson which the Alter himself personified in his own life. Whether it was leaving the family business to take up life, learning in Kovna, in the Koilel, whether it was deciding to become a Parush for several years, or whether it was, at the insistence of the Alter of Kelm, deciding to leave that life and do the very opposite, and in the course of doing so, save a whole generation of Yidden in Europe. He was not afraid to ask himself the question, which direction am I going in? Stepping off the platform and taking the train in a different direction. Like Yonah said, Ivri Anoichi. Wishing you all Gemach Simatova.